Imagine someone told you that nearly half of what you learned about history was actually high-budget fan fiction. Sounds insane, right? But don't react just yet. Today we're tearing down the velvet curtain of polished history, the one where truth is simply a story repeated so many times that everyone stopped questioning it. And to begin, let's talk about the shiniest lie humanity ever bought: diamonds. Picture yourself as an American man in the 1950s. You work in a factory, save every dollar, and finally decide to propose to the woman you love. You walk into a jewelry store, and the salesman, smiling bright as the display lights, tells you, "A diamond is forever. If you truly love her, you'll buy this one." So you sign the contract, heavier than your own heart. Just one small problem. "A diamond is forever" wasn't a love philosophy. It was an ad slogan. The truth is, diamonds aren't rare. In fact, they're one of the most common gemstones on Earth. But in the 20th century, a company called De Beers pulled off the con of the century. They bought nearly all global diamond supplies, hoarded mountains of stones in warehouses, and released only a trickle, just enough to make the world believe diamonds were incredibly scarce. Then they hired an ad agency, and just like that, "A Diamond is Forever" was born, one of the most successful marketing campaigns in history. The result? Every proposal, every wedding, every couple in America unknowingly became unpaid salespeople for De Beers. Beauty, romance, and symbolism. All of it was an 80-year PR performance. And the funniest part? Even after knowing the truth, you still want one. Because sometimes a lie polished well enough can make the truth afraid to look in the mirror. 2. Cleopatra, the queen who wasn't Egyptian. You've heard that Cleopatra was the legendary queen of Egypt. The woman so enchanting she drove both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony to madness. Hollywood loves to say a single glance from her could bring an empire to its knees. Beautiful, powerful, mysterious, the perfect character for every movie. But the truth is a little different. First of all, Cleopatra wasn't Egyptian. She came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal family that ruled Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great. So if you'd invited her to dinner, she'd probably have chosen Greek wine and cheese over Egyptian beer and bread. The Queen of Egypt, who was actually Greek. History sure loves irony. And about that beauty that toppled empires? Sorry, but if you look at the coins engraved with Cleopatra's face, you'll notice something. Hollywood probably owes her an apology. She had a hooked nose, a high forehead, and a sharp chin. She looked more like a college professor than a goddess. But Cleopatra didn't need beauty. She had brilliance. She spoke 9 languages and knew more about economics, philosophy, and politics than most men of her time. In a world that dismissed women, she played the power game better than anyone. So why does history only remember Cleopatra as the seductive beauty? Because men wrote the history books, and Hollywood made the movies. Intelligence is hard to film, but eyeliner isn't. 3. The Great Wall of China, the lie you can't see from space. Since childhood, we've all been told that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from the moon. It sounds majestic, a symbol of human brilliance and strength. Just one small problem. It's completely false. No one has ever seen the wall from the moon. In fact, even from low Earth orbit, astronauts say they can barely spot it, if at all. You can see highways, airports, even city grids, but that massive wall stretching thousands of miles? It disappears like it's playing hide and seek with NASA. Why? Because it's only about 6 meters wide, roughly the size of a small road. Imagine trying to see a single human hair from 2 meters away. Good luck with that. So where did the rumor start? Back in the 18th century, an English writer guessed, without evidence, that the wall must be so enormous it could be seen from the moon. There was no space travel back then, so no one could fact-check him, and the world just believed it. Newspapers, teachers, textbooks, all kept repeating the same beautiful lie like a bedtime story. Even today, when astronauts confirm, "No, we can't see it," many people still refuse to believe them, because sometimes the greatest lies are the ones we most want to be true. 4. St. Patrick and the snakes that never existed. Every March, the Irish and half the world pour into the streets in green outfits, drinking beer, dancing, and shouting, "Happy St. Patrick's Day." Because according to legend, St. Patrick drove all the snakes out of Ireland, a heroic figure, symbol of faith and divine power. Except, Ireland never had any snakes to begin with. That's right. It wasn't Patrick's miracle, it was geography's. After the Ice Age, rising seas isolated Ireland completely from mainland Europe, and when reptiles like snakes tried to migrate, they were greeted by a freezing ocean and probably thought, yeah, no, we're staying home. The result? No snakes. None. Zero. So the story of St. Patrick banishing the snakes is really just a metaphor. The snakes represented pagan beliefs, and Patrick, by spreading Christianity, drove those beliefs out of the land. In other words, he didn't fight reptiles. He fought a belief system. But centuries later, people kept the story literal, because honestly, it just sounded more fun that way. Let's be real. He successfully converted the masses doesn't hit quite like he slayed 10,000 serpents and saved an island. And that's how a religious metaphor turned into a 1,500-year-old action movie. 5. Newton and the apple that never hit his head. Everyone knows the legendary story. Isaac Newton is sitting under a tree. An apple falls. Boink. And just like that, he discovers the law of universal gravitation, a classic eureka moment in the history of science. Only one problem. There was never a boink. No one, not even Newton himself, ever said the apple hit his head. He only said he saw one fall and wondered why it dropped straight down instead of sideways. That thought sparked one of the greatest theories in human history, and not a single bruise was involved. So where did the apple to the head story come from? Biographers, years later, decided Newton's version was too dull. A genius quietly watching fruit fall didn't sound exciting, but a genius getting smacked in the skull by divine produce and instantly discovering gravity. Perfect. Hollywood would approve. So they added the boink to make it catchy, memorable, and, let's be honest, way more fun. No one wants a lecture on physics, but everyone loves a story about a flying apple, a bumped head, and the birth of genius. The truth is, Newton was never hit, but he was struck by something else, curiosity. And that falling apple, it became the most successful piece of physics marketing in history. 6. Sherlock Holmes and the line he never said. Picture this: London fog thick as smoke, horse hooves clacking on cobblestone, Sherlock Holmes peering through his magnifying glass, then turning to his companion and saying, "Elementary, my dear Watson." The legendary line, cool, confident, unmistakably brilliant. There's just one tiny problem. Sherlock Holmes never said it. That's right. Across all 56 stories and 4 novels written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, not once does the line, "Elementary, my dear Watson," appear. Holmes said, "Elementary." He also said, "My dear Watson." But those two lines never met on the same page. So where did it come from? From movies and stage plays. In the 1920s, screenwriters wanted Holmes to sound sharper, more iconic, so they stitched the two phrases together into one unforgettable catchphrase. It's like merging "May the Force be with you" with "I'm Batman," and insisting Darth Vader actually said it. The line became so famous that people started believing Conan Doyle himself wrote it, though he never did. When asked, the author reportedly just shrugged. Maybe he knew that once a quote becomes a legend, it doesn't need to be true anymore. And that's how Sherlock Holmes, the symbol of logic and reason, became famous for a line that was pure fiction. Quite elementary, isn't it? 7. The Flat Earth Myth. When history got dumber. You've probably heard this one somewhere. People in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat. They supposedly feared sailing too far, thinking they'd fall off the edge like a giant cosmic pizza. Funny, right? The problem is, it's completely made up. No, people in the Middle Ages did not believe the Earth was flat. They knew perfectly well it was round, and they didn't need Elon Musk to prove it. Scholars of the time studied and taught the works of Aristotle and Ptolemy, both of whom described a spherical Earth as early as the 4th century BC. Even Christian theologians agreed. No one thought the Earth was flat, except a few people on Facebook today. So where did the myth come from? In the 19th century, writers wanted to paint Christopher Columbus as a misunderstood hero. They claimed that when he proposed sailing west to reach India, everyone mocked him for believing the Earth was round, but in reality, no one thought he'd fall off the edge. They just believed he had miscalculated the planet's size, and they were right. He was off by almost half. Still, Columbus bravely proved the Earth was round sounded far more inspiring in textbooks, and so we grew up thinking everyone back then was foolish, and Columbus was a lone genius. The truth? The world was never flat. Only our version of history was. 8. The Titanic was never called unsinkable. Everyone knows the story. The greatest ship ever built, the Titanic, was advertised as unsinkable. And then it sank. A perfect symbol of human arrogance swallowed by the sea. Tragic, poetic, almost mythic. Except for one small detail. No one ever called the Titanic unsinkable until after it went down. That's right. The White Star Line never used the word unsinkable in its marketing. They described it as practically unsinkable. A careful lawyer's phrase, like saying water-resistant instead of waterproof. But when disaster struck, newspapers wanted drama, and the unsinkable ship sinks was the perfect headline. As thousands died and the world mourned, the story of pride punished by fate spread everywhere. Reporters, novelists, and later Hollywood amplified it tenfold. No one wanted a technical lecture on watertight bulkhead design flaws. They wanted a tragic ballad about humanity defying nature. And so the Titanic became a monument to arrogance, when in truth it was a victim of media and myth-making. To be precise, the Titanic didn't die from pride. It died from post-tragedy marketing. 9. The 300 Spartans who weren't alone. If you've seen the movie 300, you probably remember that moment when Leonidas shouts, "This is Sparta," and kicks a poor messenger into a pit. An iconic burst of testosterone. 300 Spartan warriors standing bravely against 1,000,000 Persian soldiers. A symbol of courage, sacrifice, and defiance. Inspiring, sure, but those 300 didn't fight alone. The Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BC wasn't just about the Spartans. In reality, there were around 7,000 other Greek soldiers from city-states like Thespiae, Thebes, and Arcadia. So if it were a historically accurate movie, it should have been called 7,300. But you know how it goes. 300 looks bolder on the poster and sells way more tickets. Yes, the Spartans were elite warriors, and they truly fought to the death. But without their allies, they would have been crushed in the first 5 minutes. Ancient storytellers simply trimmed the details to make it sound more heroic. And Hollywood later doubled down, with muscles, red capes, and CGI abs. So over the centuries, we came to believe that 300 men held off an entire empire. The truth? It was a coalition of 7,000, but both history and cinema prefer drama over accuracy. In short, the Spartans didn't stand alone. They were just the stars in a much bigger cast that history forgot to credit. 10. The Trojan horse that probably never existed. You know the story. After 10 long years of siege, the Greeks came up with a brilliant plan. Build a giant wooden horse, hide soldiers inside it, pretend to sail away, and trick the Trojans into pulling it inside their walls. That night, the hidden soldiers slipped out, opened the gates, and boom, Troy fell. A flawless plan. Except, no one's actually sure it ever happened. Most historians believe the horse was a metaphor, not a massive wooden creature on wheels. It might have been a type of siege weapon, like a battering ram, nicknamed the horse. Or it could have referred to an earthquake, since the Greeks believed Poseidon, the god of horses and earthquakes, helped them destroy the city walls. In other words, the wooden horse may have just been poetic symbolism that went a little too viral. Still, the image of a giant horse packed with hidden warriors was too good to let go. It had betrayal, strategy, and the most dramatic twist in ancient history. And when Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey, he knew exactly what every great storyteller knows. Sometimes the audience doesn't want the truth. They want a story worth believing. So maybe the Trojan horse never existed, but it remains the most successful content delivery system in human history. 11. The Mozart effect that never made anyone smarter. In the 1990s, a strange craze swept across America. Parents everywhere started playing Mozart for their babies, believing it would make them smarter. Baby Mozart CDs sold out. Some states even handed out classical music discs to every new parent. Imagine it, a whole generation of infants lying in their cribs, listening to Eine kleine Nachtmusik, supposedly preparing to become geniuses. Just one small problem, the Mozart effect never actually existed. The craze began with a 1993 study where college students listened to 10 minutes of Mozart before taking a spatial reasoning test. The results? Their scores went up slightly for about 10 minutes. Not IQ, not a genius, just a temporary boost in focus. No divine Mozart magic turned anyone into Einstein. But the media skimmed the results and ran the headline, "Listening to Mozart makes you smarter." Marketing companies saw the gold mine and turned one tiny study into a multi-million-dollar baby music empire. The truth is, Mozart can't make you smarter, but he sure made a lot of people richer, thanks to gullible parents. The takeaway? If you want your kid to be a genius, teach them to read a book, not listen to someone else practice scales. 12. The Wild West. That wasn't that wild. If you grew up watching cowboy movies, you probably think the American West was pure chaos. Gunfighters with scruffy beards, high noon duels, horses kicking up dust, saloons where every argument ended with a bullet. A world with no law, just men in wide-brimmed hats settling scores their own way. Problem is, the real West wasn't nearly that wild. In truth, Western towns in the late 1800s were surprisingly ordinary. Many had strict gun laws, requiring visitors to hand over their weapons to the sheriff or lock them up at their hotel. Those famous high noon showdowns, two men stepping into the street, staring each other down. Bang! It rarely happened. They were inventions of dime novels and broke writers who needed to sell another story. Most Wild West violence was just bar fights or land disputes. Honestly, most cowboys spent their days herding cattle, not firing guns. Their lives looked less like the good, the bad, and the ugly, and more like the tired, the dusty, and the smelly. Then Hollywood saw an opportunity. They took a few drunken brawls and turned them into symbols of American masculinity and freedom. And that's how the Wild West was born. Mostly just the West. With really good PR. 13. The cowboys who weren't all white. When you picture a cowboy, you probably see a white guy in a wide-brimmed hat, riding into the sunset, spitting dust, and growling in that rough, gravelly voice, "This town ain't big enough for the both of us." Then bang! 2 guns, 1 survivor. Cool, rugged, all-American. Except, most cowboys weren't white. Roughly 25% of the cowboys in the Old West were African American. Many of them freed slaves who took on the hard, dirty jobs nobody else wanted. Herding cattle, hunting bandits, mucking out stalls, guarding the herds through the night. And much of what we think of as cowboy culture, horse riding skills, leatherwork, roping techniques, actually came from Mexican traditions, passed down by vaqueros, the native cattle herders who worked those lands centuries before the Americans arrived. In other words, the American cowboy was a multicultural remix long before that word existed. There were black cowboys, Mexican cowboys, native cowboys, and a few recent European immigrants thrown in. Then Hollywood showed up, and you know what happened next. They looked at that vibrant mix of faces and said, easier to film if they're all white. And so, for an entire century, we grew up believing cowboy meant John Wayne. The truth? Cowboy meant mixed culture on horseback. The West wasn't just white and wild. It was brown, black, bold, and badly sunburned. 14. The absinthe hallucination that never happened. Ah, yes, absinthe, the legendary green liquor known as the Green Fairy. The drink of mad artists, tortured poets, and haunted geniuses like Van Gogh. People said one sip could make you hallucinate, talk to ghosts, and paint a masterpiece. Sounds amazing, if you're a thirsty artist looking for an excuse to drink every day. But the truth is, absinthe never made anyone hallucinate. The myth of the Green Fairy was a smear campaign. In the late 19th century, absinthe became more popular than wine in France, and the wine industry panicked. So they spread stories claiming absinthe made people insane, violent, and self-destructive. Hello, Van Gogh. The result? Absinthe was banned for nearly a century. In reality, the drink contains only tiny amounts of thujone, a compound that can mildly stimulate the nervous system. But to reach a level that causes hallucinations, you'd have to drink enough to die of alcohol poisoning first. In other words, no fairies, just a blackout. Artists like Van Gogh and Hemingway weren't tripping on absinthe. They were just drunk, but with style. So next time someone claims they saw green fairies after a few glasses of absinthe, remember, they didn't see fairies. They just saw dim lights and an empty wallet. 15. The Iron Maiden, that never tortured anyone. When you think of the Middle Ages, what comes to mind first? A knight on a white horse? A stone castle wrapped in fog? Or a giant iron coffin lined with spikes where victims were locked inside and shut tight like a human sandwich? That's right, the Iron Maiden, the ultimate symbol of medieval cruelty. Terrifying, isn't it? There's just one small problem. It never tortured anyone. There's no historical record, none, of the Iron Maiden existing in the actual Middle Ages. No documents, no blueprints, no eyewitness accounts. It was invented in the late 18th century, hundreds of years after the era it supposedly haunted. Who invented it? Collectors and museum owners who realized tourists loved staring at torture devices. So they took an old coffin, hammered in some rusty nails, and put up a sign, "Medieval torture device, prepare to scream." Visitors gasped, shivered, and paid for tickets. A big win for the horror tourism industry. The Iron Maiden never killed anyone, but it's tortured plenty of students in history class. And ironically, its name inspired one of the loudest rock bands of the 20th century. So no, it never tormented medieval prisoners, but it definitely tortured modern eardrums. 16. The Fountain of Youth that never existed. Legend says there was a Spanish explorer named Juan Ponce de Leon who spent his life searching for the Fountain of Youth, a magical spring that could reverse time and make anyone who drank from it forever young. Sounds like the trailer for a Disney movie, doesn't it? Except, he never actually searched for it. In reality, Ponce de Leon never mentioned a Fountain of Youth in any of his journals or expedition reports. He went to Florida for something far more human, to find gold, claim land, and impress the king. The story of the eternal youth spring appeared decades after his death, added by historians who wanted to turn a ruthless conquistador into a harmless old fool. A bit of posthumous PR. He wasn't invading. He was just looking for a bath. The legend spread like anti-aging cream in a TV commercial. Who wouldn't want to believe in something that stops time? But no, there was no magic fountain, no everlasting youth. And Ponce de Leon? He died at 47 from an arrow wound. So if the Fountain of Youth ever existed, he definitely didn't make it in time for a sip. Still, let's be fair. This legend survives for a reason. It taps into something deeply human. We don't really want to live forever. We just don't want to look like we're dying. 17. The Curse of the Pharaoh that never killed anyone. You've heard the story. The Curse of the Pharaoh. It's so famous that everyone already knows the ending. Archaeologists uncover the tomb of King Tutankhamun, and one by one, they die mysteriously. The lights flicker, the wind howls, and a chilling voice whispers, "Those who disturb the king's eternal rest shall be cursed for all eternity." Sounds like a Universal horror movie trailer, doesn't it? The problem is, there was never a curse. In 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter and his team discovered King Tut's tomb. A few months later, the expedition's financier, Lord Carnarvon, died from an infected mosquito bite. The press went wild. Pharaoh's curse strikes again. Ancient spirits take their revenge. Too good a story to fact-check, and an even better one to sell newspapers. But when statisticians later reviewed the records, they found something inconvenient. Out of the more than 50 people involved in the excavation, almost none died mysteriously. Their average lifespan was actually longer than that of the general British population. Howard Carter, the man who opened the tomb himself, lived another 17 years. No mummies walked, no ghostly green light, just dust, and thousands of catalogued artifacts. The curse of the pharaoh wasn't supernatural. It was tabloid magic, killing reason, not people. And honestly, if some ancient power really wanted revenge, they probably would have started by cursing Hollywood for making such bad movies about it. 18. The medieval people who actually bathed. We all grew up picturing medieval people as so filthy they must have had their own personal scent. Rusty knights, mud-covered peasants, and kings sitting on their thrones smelling like expired cheese. Everyone thinks people in the Middle Ages never bathed. But the truth is, they bathed more than you'd expect. Sure, they didn't have showers, loofahs, or lavender-scented body wash, But most towns had public bathhouses where people washed, relaxed, and gossiped, a kind of medieval spa and gossip combo. Some kings and queens were even famous for being obsessed with cleanliness. Charlemagne once ordered that everyone should bathe at least 4 times a year. Sounds low? Remember, this was before hot water and Dove soap existed. They used soap made from animal fat and lye, and often soaked it in herbal-scented water. Children were taught to wash their hands before meals, rinse their faces in the morning, and comb their hair daily. Not bad for an era accused of being dirty as the Dark Ages, right? So why do we think they never bathed? Because during the plague, public bathhouses were banned out of fear they spread disease. Centuries later, historians looked back and assumed no one washed at all. The truth is, they bathed plenty. They just didn't post it on Instagram. 19. The short medieval lifespan myth. Ever heard someone say that people in the Middle Ages only lived to be 30? Like they hit adulthood just in time to start writing their will? Every historical movie shows a 28-year-old with gray hair, trembling as he whispers, "I've lived a long life." The problem is that it's completely wrong. That average lifespan of 30 years you've heard about is a statistical trick. It's dragged down by one brutal factor: infant mortality. Back then, around 30 to 40% of children died before reaching age 5. And when you calculate the average lifespan, those tiny numbers tank the entire chart. But if someone made it past 20, living to 60 or even 70 was totally normal. Plenty of folks lived long enough to complain about kids these days. Literally. Historians have found letters, diaries, and gravestones showing the ages of thousands of real people. And most of them didn't die at 30. They grew old, had grandchildren, and still had time to grumble about the rising price of bread. The whole "they all died young" story was mostly inflated by modern people trying to feel superior. They only lived 30 years. Meanwhile, I have anti-aging cream. The truth is, medieval people didn't all die young. They just lived in a world where childhood came with slightly higher odds. 20. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't that bloody. Just hearing the name. The Spanish Inquisition. You probably picture dark dungeons, echoing screams, and cold-eyed priests torturing people with horrific devices. It feels like a horror movie with a side of religion. But here's the surprising part. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't nearly as bloody as we think. Yes, torture and executions did happen. No one's denying that. But compared to the secular courts of the same era, the Inquisition was actually lenient. In fact, official rules limited torture to 15 minutes, and a doctor had to be present. Meanwhile, in regular European courts, they could torture you all day and charge overtime for it. And despite thousands of trials, only about 1 to 2% ended in execution. Most sentences were fines, penance, or what we'd now call mandatory religious re-education. In other words, the Inquisition was less a killing machine and more like a very unpleasant morality class. So why does it have such a terrifying reputation? You can thank the anti-Spanish propaganda of the Protestant Reformation, especially from England and the Netherlands, who turned the Inquisition into a symbol of pure evil. The smear campaign worked so well that centuries later, just hearing Spanish Inquisition still makes people shiver. The truth is, they were frightening. Just not as frightening as the movie that plays in your head. 21. The Roman emperor who didn't fiddle while Rome burned. We all know the story. Nero, the cruel Roman emperor, is standing on his palace balcony, calmly playing the violin while Rome burns beneath him, a symbol of arrogance, indifference, and pure tyranny. It's a perfect image, because it's completely false. First of all, the violin didn't even exist in Nero's time. That instrument appeared nearly 1,000 years later. So, unless Nero was a time traveler, he wasn't fiddling with anything. If he played music at all, it would have been on a lyre, the ancient Greek string instrument. But Nero strummed the lyre just doesn't sound dramatic enough for history books. Second, when the Great Fire of Rome began, Nero wasn't even in the city. He was in Antium, about 35 miles away. When he got the news, he rushed back to Rome, organized firefighting efforts, and even opened his palace to shelter displaced citizens. Pretty humanitarian behavior for a man history branded a monster. So why did the story of fiddling while Rome burned spread? Simple. The Romans hated him. After his death, political rivals created the legend to destroy his reputation forever. It was ancient smear PR, and it worked brilliantly. To be fair, Nero never played music while Rome burned, but he did burn in the memory of Rome, in the worst way possible. 22. The message to Garcia that was mostly made up. In 1899, a short essay called A Message to Garcia spread like wildfire across the United States. It told the story of a heroic soldier assigned to deliver an urgent message to the Cuban revolutionary leader, Garcia. He asked no questions, complained about nothing, and carried out his mission without hesitation. A symbol of discipline, duty, and unquestioning loyalty. Inspiring, right? Until you find out that most of it was made up. The essay was written by Elbert Hubbard, a businessman and amateur philosopher who just needed to fill space in his magazine. He dashed it off in under an hour, based on a half-remembered story he'd heard somewhere, and published it without checking a single fact. But somehow, whether by luck or irony, it became required reading for soldiers and corporate employees across America for the next 100 years. The problem? The real soldier, Lieutenant Andrew Rowan, didn't trek alone through the jungle carrying the message. He was escorted, guided, and helped by Cuban forces the entire way. No lone hero, no silent warrior, just an ordinary mission inflated into legend. Hubbard had accidentally created the first viral inspirational hoax in modern history. And honestly, LinkedIn still hasn't recovered from it. 23. The diamond lie that everyone still believes. We all know the legendary slogan, "A diamond is forever." A sparkling stone symbolizing eternal love and lifelong devotion. Romantic, meaningful, expensive. But here's the catch. It's also the most successful marketing lie in human history. Before the 20th century, diamonds weren't rare, and no one considered them particularly special. They were just one gemstone among many. Then, in 1888, a South African company called De Beers came up with a brilliant plan. They bought and controlled nearly the entire world supply of diamonds, releasing only small quantities at a time, just enough to make them look scarce. Next, they hired an advertising agency in New York, and out came the immortal slogan, "A diamond is forever." From that moment on, people believed that love wasn't complete without a piece of crystallized carbon. Weddings, proposals, anniversaries, all tied to a product a few men in a boardroom decided should become tradition. In reality, diamonds aren't rare, aren't worth as much as gold, and their value exists almost entirely in emotion. You're not buying a gem, you're buying a story. And that story is so good that 100 years later, people still believe a diamond is forever. In truth, the only thing that lasts forever is the credit card debt that paid for it. 24. The baseball lie. The mythical inventor who never played the game. If there's one sport that carries the soul of America, it's baseball. The game is said to be uniquely American, born from the American spirit, and invented on American soil. And according to legend, it was created by Abner Doubleday, a Civil War general and patriotic hero. Sounds noble, inspiring, and completely wrong. In reality, Abner Doubleday never invented baseball. He never even played it. There isn't a single line in his journals mentioning balls, bats, or ballparks. He was too busy doing what generals usually do, commanding troops, writing reports, and trying not to die in battle. So where did the story come from? In the early 1900s, a special commission was formed to find a purely American origin for baseball, because, well, no one wanted to admit it evolved from a British game called rounders. So they invented a convenient hero, an American soldier, loyal and patriotic, and boom, a legend was born. The press ran with it, the public believed it, and to this day, Cooperstown, New York, supposedly where Doubleday invented baseball, remains sacred ground for fans. This story proves one thing. Sometimes you don't have to actually do anything to make history. You just have to die early enough for someone else to write the myth for you. 25. The lemming suicide that Disney made up. You've probably heard the chilling story. Lemmings, the tiny Arctic rodents, at certain times of year supposedly go mad, stampeding toward cliffs and hurling themselves into the sea in a mass act of suicide. A tragic image, a poetic metaphor. Don't be a lemming. Don't blindly follow the crowd. There's just one small problem. The whole thing was made up by Disney. In 1958, Walt Disney Studios released a nature documentary called White Wilderness, part of its True Life Adventures series. When filmmakers couldn't find any actual footage of lemmings jumping off cliffs, because, they don't do that, They bought hundreds of them from Canadian farmers, took them to a cliff, and no joke, chased them off with brooms. Yes, really. They staged a mass suicide, and then won an Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. It was one of the few times in history that nature had to hire extras. In reality, lemmings simply migrate seasonally. When they encounter rough terrain, a few might accidentally fall, not out of despair, but out of clumsiness. But the movie was so convincing that millions believed in the lemming suicide instinct for over half a century. And so, Disney didn't just give us the cheerful Mickey Mouse, they also gave us the saddest rodents in history. 26. The ancient statues that were never white. If you've ever wandered through a Greek or Roman art museum, you've seen them. Rows of flawless white marble statues. Perfectly sculpted gods, stern-faced heroes, bodies gleaming pale as porcelain. For centuries, we've treated white as the color of purity, divinity, and classical beauty. There's just one small problem. Those statues were never white. The ancient Greeks and Romans actually painted their sculptures in every color imaginable, and subtle wasn't their thing. They used fiery reds, electric blues, blazing yellows, even bright oranges. If you time-traveled back to ancient Athens, it would look less like the Louvre and more like Las Vegas. Over time, the paint faded and chipped away, leaving behind bare marble. Renaissance scholars mistook that whiteness for the original look, and from there, white became the gold standard of classical art. And, unfortunately, fueled centuries of the idea that purity and perfection should literally be white. Today, as archaeologists uncover traces of the original pigments, people are stunned. Those ancient gods don't look like symbols of ideal beauty anymore. They look like cosplayers at a holy festival. So next time you see a white marble statue in a museum, remember, you're not looking at timeless beauty. You're looking at an artwork bleached by time. 27. The Trojan horse that probably never existed. Everyone knows the legendary story. After 10 long years of war, the Greeks devised a brilliant plan. They withdrew their troops, leaving behind a massive wooden horse as a peace offering. The Trojans, celebrating victory, dragged it through their city gates. That night, surprise, Greek soldiers climbed out from its belly, opened the gates, and Troy fell in flames before dawn. A masterpiece of deception, the kind of twist even Hollywood would envy. Only problem, it probably never happened. There's no archaeological evidence that a giant wooden horse ever existed. No wood fragments, no contemporary accounts, no trace of it at all. Most historians believe the horse was a metaphor. It could have been the name of a siege engine, or even a poetic reference to an earthquake, since Poseidon, the god of horses, was also the god of quakes. But Greeks breach the wall with siege machinery doesn't exactly sound thrilling. So poets went with the better version. They hid inside a giant horse. And that version has been retold for over 3,000 years, from Homer to Hollywood, without anyone bothering to fact-check. In the end, the Trojan horse wasn't proof of military genius. It was proof that humans have always preferred a good story over a dull truth. 28. The Titanic unsinkable myth. We all know the tragic story. The Titanic, mankind's proudest creation, was said to be unsinkable. And then, on a cold April night in 1912, it struck an iceberg and went down. For more than a century, it's been treated as a symbol of human arrogance punished by fate. But here's what few people realize. No one ever actually called the Titanic unsinkable. That phrase never appeared in any official White Star Line advertisement. No posters, no brochures, no verified press releases ever declared it the ship that could never sink. What they did say was practically unsinkable. A cautious, lawyer-friendly phrase that sounds a lot humbler. But journalists, as they tend to do, drop the practically because unsinkable ship sinks makes a much better headline than ship sinks, despite decent safety record. And just like that, the story became a perfect moral lesson. Don't challenge the gods. A masterclass in media spin, born not from engineers but from embellishing reporters. Ironically, the Titanic was quite safe by the standards of its time. Its real problem was that people believed the hype, so it carried far too few lifeboats. The myth of the unsinkable Titanic proves one thing. Sometimes what sinks you isn't the iceberg. It's the slogan that sounded too good to question. 29. The Mozart effect that fooled every parent. In the 1990s, a strange craze swept across America. Parents began playing Mozart to their babies every day, believing that a few sonatas could turn their child into a math prodigy who played the violin by age 3. Too good to be true? Exactly, because it wasn't. The craze started with a small 1993 study. Researchers had college students listen to 10 minutes of Mozart, then tested their spatial reasoning. The students performed slightly better, for about 10 minutes. No lasting effects, no miracles, no instant Einsteins. Just a brief mental boost from relaxing music. But the media heard one thing and reported another. Headlines shouted, "Listening to Mozart makes you smarter." Suddenly, millions of parents were buying CDs, and states like Georgia even handed out classical music to newborns, because science said so. A multi-million-dollar baby genius industry was born, all based on a single experiment that lasted less than half an hour. Later studies debunked the claim, but by then, the myth had already gone platinum. Mozart may calm your mind, but if his music truly made people smarter, Vienna would have been Silicon Valley in the 18th century. 30. Why we believe beautiful lies. After hearing all 29 stories, you might be wondering, how can people fall for lies so easily? From wooden horses and shiny diamonds to suicidal lemmings chased off cliffs by Disney, they all share one thing in common. They're too fascinating to question. The truth is boring. Lies, when told well, make us laugh, gasp, or feel clever. Humans don't just believe stories. We want to believe them. We crave a world that feels ordered, meaningful, and just a little dramatic. Think about it. Nero helped put out the fire. Doesn't hit nearly as hard as Nero played music while Rome burned. We don't seek truth. We seek emotion. Worse yet, once we believe something, our brains defend that belief like it's a Netflix account. It hates being logged out of illusion. So the beautiful lies live on, retold, polished, and passed down until they become traditional truth. And honestly, that's not always bad. Myths make history easier to understand. They inspire movies, songs, and stories, and they keep the past from putting us to sleep. The real problem comes when we forget that a good story isn't always a true one. So next time someone says, "Cleopatra was the ultimate beauty," "Titanic was unsinkable," or "a diamond is forever," just smile and say, "Maybe." But I'll wait for the fact check. Because in the end, history isn't just what happened. It's what we keep retelling until we believe it did. And if your brain feels both tricked and entertained right now, congratulations. You've just graduated from history, the not entirely accurate edition. Now go ahead and hit that subscribe button before I tell you a few more beautiful lies.